technologies which have become so pervasive and so powerful at the heart of our life, at our work, and how some of those technologies seem to be taking us off a good path, and what we can do about that. And the idea of the monster and taming the monster is something we propose as some ideas, some provocations, some thought.
Ben, Pring, welcome to WorkPod podcast, and today we will talk to Ben, and Ben is an expert on future of work. He has a book out, Monster, and why Ben is such a crucial person to be having a conversation with about this topic is he's actually running an organization that calls Future of Work. So you cannot have any parity on that. So Ben, welcome to the podcast. To start, talk to us about your journey. Talk to us about what brought you to this day.
Yeah. Well, I run a group in Cognizant called the Center for the Future of Work. I'm the head of thought leadership in Cognizant. Many of your listeners, watchers will know Cognizant, a big technology consulting and services company. And I set the Center for the Future of Work up about 10 years ago. And it's got a charter to kind of look at leading edge technology, how that intersects with business, the opportunities and the challenges that our clients face. And then more broadly about how technology is becoming so central to, every aspect of our work and our lives. And I've been in technology all my life. I've been in Cognizant 10 years. I was an analyst with Gartner for 15 years, and I tracked the emergence of what we now know as the cloud. And then prior to that, I was in the management consulting world, PwC back in the day. So I've always been in technology. I've always loved technology. I've always loved the future of technology. I've always been a kind of futurologist, somebody interested in sci-fi, live long and prosper, a Trekkie from way back. And, I've always believed in the positive power of technology. Technology has lifted the world, changed the world, brought people from all around the world to a level of prosperity and opportunity that would be unimaginable 50 years ago, 100 years ago. But this new book, Monster, is a kind of recognition that some of these technologies, which undoubtedly have a positive, good side, we can also see increasingly have a kind of dark side, a downside. And the motivating animus, if you like, of the book and writing a book and wanting to talk about this is that we believe, myself, my co-author Paul Rohrig, who also works in Cognizant, we believe we have a responsibility to ensure that tech is continually used as a force for good and doesn't kind of go off the rails. I think that would be bad for us personally, it'd be bad for Cognizant, it'd be bad for the world. So that's why we've kind of steered into these issues around data and surveillance and automation, and tried to provide a path forward in which we, as I say, can use these things for good and kind of mitigate the downsides of them.
Well said. So I want to ask you, I think if we go 10 years back about the future of data or future of work conversation within Cognizant and saying, okay, or starting this particular group, how has future of work evolved over the last 10 years? If you can walk us through, what are some of your stark observation as over the last decade?
Yeah. Well, it's a nice way to think about it, to think about that journey. I mean, back in 2011, that phrase, the future of work, a few people were talking about that. Not that many people were talking about that and thinking about how work was changing as a consequence of increasing digitization in big businesses. We wrote the first kind of big book that we wrote about this in 2014 that we called Code Halos, which was about the digital fingerprint as it's now sort of understood. A code halo, as we described it, which back then in 2013, 2014 wasn't really well understood. This notion that every like, every swipe, every digital interaction you were having on your computer, your phone, on your smart wristband, that was creating this sort of digital fingerprint, this code halo. and that was really how Amazon were doing what they were doing. This is how the notion, if you like this book, you might like this book, or if you like this movie, you might like this movie. That notion of personalization was becoming kind of more apparent, but not many people had really figured out what that game was, how it was being played. So that book sort of got us on the map a little bit, and a lot of people were interested in that. Then in 2017, we wrote a book called What to Do When Machines Do Everything, which was about the power of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And again, if you think back to then, 2015, 2016, not many people had really realized at that stage that AI, which was something they'd seen in movies and read about in books and seen in TV shows, that was becoming a business tool and was going to become a really important business tool that would differentiate leaders from laggards going forward. So we pushed that book out. That did very well, got a lot of attention, really, again, steered into this idea that automating work was going to change work fundamentally. And also we argued in the book that automating work wasn't going to destroy work and human work wasn't going to go away. There was still going to be plenty of work in the future, but it was just going to be different work. And so we wrote about that. We pushed that book out. That was successful, as I said. We talked about that for a while. And then as we started to think about a third book, this was when really this notion of these ideas that we'd been looking at and sort of talking about, in a way, the positive power of these technologies, we could see that the dark side of those technologies was becoming very real. And so if you think about data, data is the heart to doing personalization, customization of services. It's the heart of how, again, that sort of Amazon model, that kind of mass personalized model, can delight us, can make us happy because we don't have to re-enter our information all the time. But at the same time, the dark side of that, the flip side of that, was this whole notion of surveillance. And some of your listeners will know the phrase surveillance capitalism, this idea that we've built a whole economy on basically surveilling people. And that sort of creepy side of that was becoming very real. And then, of course, in a national security context, that was a very big deal as well. And again, likewise, in the whole discussion around automation, that we could see that automating of some people's work away was actually part of the reason why there was so much political rancor in the world, so many people feeling they had sort of been left behind. And that motivated Brexit, and it motivated the elevation of President Trump. And so, again, we wanted to sort of look at these things and almost take a time out and say, look, we can clearly see a good path here. We can see a darker path, and we need to think about that. So really, this journey in the last 10 years about the future of work has all been about the power of technology, how central technologies become to our lives, and how we need to be able to manage technology and not let it manage us, because that's sort of what it feels like a little bit at the moment.
That is interesting. So over last 10 years, what are some of the stark surprises that you have surfaced when it comes to the perception of future of work and where actually it is going? So walk us through some of the surprises that you have seen over the last 10 years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even today, Vishal, as we're recording this, people may have seen Microsoft buying Nuance for $16 billion. We've been talking about voice as a new kind of frontier, a new dimension for a while now in the Center for the Future of Work. This transition, we call it from the thumb, texting, to the voice, because we're going to talk to technology in the future predominantly, and technology is going to talk back to us. So that's a kind of example of something we saw on the edge of our radar, we were excited by, talked about, and now Microsoft's sort of buying into that market with $16 billion. I mean, that's just one example. The other one that I'm really interested in the moment, which is coming up, maybe still the future of work for a lot of people, but I think it's going to be a very big deal, is the notion of what's being called digital humans. The idea of the next generation of chatbots, if you like, where there's a visual representation of a human, which over particularly a kind of Zoom level of call with the kind of the visual quality, the verisimilitude that you get on a kind of on a video call nowadays, you can't really tell the difference between that digital human and a real human. I mean, that's going to be a very, very big deal going forward. And so, I mean, we joke sometimes here at the Center for the Future of Work that the future is always in the future. By definition, it always gives us something interesting to talk about tomorrow because there's so much innovation going on, there's so much technology change going on. I mean, one other way I just frame it, Vishal, thinking a little bit further back than 10 years, but say the last 20 years, my father died in 1993. He was almost 80 then. He was an older dad. But I often think to myself, if he came back today and saw how we're living and how we're working, I mean, we are living in a science fiction movie from his perspective. You know, he'd never had a computer, never used the internet, wouldn't know what an app was, wouldn't know what a smartphone it was, wouldn't know what a smartwatch would be, wouldn't know what GPS was, wouldn't know what AI was, wouldn't know what Shazam was. You know, all these technologies that we now use quite routinely have all come up in a very, very short period of time. And we are, to somebody just a short generation ago, 20 years ago, we are literally living in a science fiction movie now. And that's kind of amazing, kind of exciting, particularly if you like science fiction.
I think that's absolutely true. So, in fact, it reminds me of a conversation I was having with someone, and one of the scientists at Media Lab in MIT. So he was talking about the idea of enchanted objects, right? So his perspective was
David
Rose, right? So he was talking about, hey, how. In a natural world, if you think of technology, it's not really computers and going to these interfaces. The objects themselves should get so smart when they talk to us, and we should be able to get a smart umbrella and all that. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that was really our similar idea. In fact, we invited David to speak at one of our client conferences a few years ago, and that was, in a way, I think he had a similar idea, or we had a similar idea to him around this notion of the code halo. This was the kind of early age of the Internet of Things becoming smart, every physical device being connected to the cloud, transmitting, generating data. And if you could make sense of that data, and that's where kind of machine learning comes into the picture, then you could begin to generate business value from that. So, yeah, this proliferation of intelligence into the network, again, is a very, very real thing. I think there's been this sort of hype cycle around IoT, and perhaps we're a little bit in the trough of that disillusionment now. But again, there's just no two ways around the fact that literally everything is going to be connected to the grid in due course. The next wave of that is going to be glasses. Apple are readying themselves to launch augmented reality in July. Facebook have 20% of their people working on VR-based platforms. So that's imminent. That's going to be the next big platform after the phone and after voice. So that's a very, very big deal. Again, in our perspective and in the argument, the framework of the argument we have in our new book, Monster, that's why this is such an important time for people of goodwill like us who love technology to make sure that this next level of invasive technology is managed properly. We're not great fans of the Neuralink idea, the Elon Musk Neuralink idea, because we know what can go wrong with technology, and having that brain tech interface, I mean, something's going to go wrong with that. And so, again, we need to put in place the new rules of the road. We need to understand how central technology is so we can harness it, so we can tame it, so we can, as I say, sort of harness that power and not allow to blow us all up. Again, some of your listeners and viewers will remember that famous moment when Mark Zuckerberg was in front of Congress a couple of years ago, And one of the elderly senators said to him, what's your business model, Mr. Zuckerberg? And Zuckerberg just looked at him and said, Senator, we sell ads. That to us was a perfect encapsulation of a new game being played, and the umpires didn't really even understand the game. So how can they adjudicate? How can they write the rules of this game if they don't really understand how the game is being played? Again, that's the moment we're at, where we need to craft these rules and regulations so we can play the game, but not blow everything up in the process.
Interesting. I think that's a well put, and we'll talk about Monster in few minutes. Yeah. And love to talk to you about so some of the misconceptions that business have about the work, right? So about the future of work. So from your vantage point, when you interact with suite of customers or clients, and their perspective of where the future of work is heading to, we're curious to know what are some of the misconceptions that businesses are having when it comes to their understanding of where work is going.
Yeah, well, I think there's a few ways to unpack that. One is to say that a lot of companies, and I'd say the majority of companies, haven't really acted on the future of work messaging that many other companies nowadays have been talking about for a while. Less progress has really been made in adopting the cloud at scale, data at scale, automation at scale, than perhaps some people would believe to be the case. I mean, if you think about the cloud now, there are a variety of estimates out there from folks like Gartner. Their suggestion is that cloud as a model represents about 25% of big corporate enterprise workloads. Some of the folks at AWS last week said they think it's less than that. They think it's more in the 8 to 10% range. So if you think about that, I started writing about the cloud in the late 90s in Gartner. 25 years later, it's not the majority, it's not the norm, it's still the exception. So, that's surprising in a way that we haven't made more progress towards that. And I think if you look at what's going on in the world at the moment and this sort of pandemic experience and the economic bounce back, economists are talking about this K-shaped recovery. Some companies are doing very well. Some companies are really struggling. I think the determinant, the differentiator there is whether you as a company have a sophisticated, world-class, high-quality route to market through digital. If you have if you're a retailer and you have a good e-commerce platform, you're doing great. And so that differential between up and down really is how seriously you've taken the digital transformation messaging in the marketplace in the last few years, and how materially you've acted on that. So that's one aspect of it. Businesses, I think, really know now that this is mission critical. Many businesses are on a sort of burning platform, and they've got to act very quickly to kind of retool their businesses for the reality of a world in which everything that can go online basically is going to go online. So that's one aspect, I'd say. Another big aspect of this future work discussion in the last few years, and I know you guys have talked about this quite a bit, is this whole notion that if work is going to change through automation, through machine learning, then the people that we have in the business, or the people we need to attract to work in the business, need probably a different set of skills and probably a higher order of skills than they have currently. So that notion of retraining, upskilling, I mean, that's become a very, very big deal for a lot of businesses. And to try and, again, institute that at scale within a business is not easy. So that's another big sort of part of it, the HR part of it, if you like. So I'd really think about those two elements of it. There's the sort of technology allowing you to be a modern business, allowing you to have a superior experience for your customers, for your employees as well, and then having the right skill sets in the business So again, that you're kind of fit for the future, you're relevant in the future. You have people working in the business who understand data, who understand modern cloud platforms, who understand what those sort of experiences, what the watermark, if you like, of kind of the experiences that customers and prospects and employees expect nowadays. I mean, that's really kind of two sides of the same coin, but I think that's very much on the top of a lot of executives' minds right now.
I think that's well put. So you said that so there's a skill aspect and there's a technology aspect that sort of businesses they have to be mindful about. And actually, I was talking to someone from telecom background, one of the organizational head at one of the largest telco company, and we were talking about this idea of skill set, right? So as we know, technology and skill, right now both of them are very active in the ecosystem. So technology is transforming pretty rapidly, right? And it takes time for skills to be adopted so people can manage with this technology adoptions. So their anxiety point was, if your skill or if your ability to acquire a skill takes longer than the shelf life of technology itself, then you cannot win that battle, right? Eventually you will end up paying and probably being obsolete regardless. So what is your take, because you deal with a lot of clients, you deal with a lot of people problem yourself and you with your clients on sort of getting this technology and skill sort of in the hands of these two interesting keywords. What is your take on that?
Yeah, no, it's a point well made, Vishal. But the shelf life of skills is getting shorter and shorter. And I get this question a lot from executives, from parents who sidle up to me after an event and quietly say to me, what should my kids be studying? And I often point out to them that, if you go to college now and you study, I don't know, MySQL or C++ or something, probably in 10 years' time, that skill will have less value in the marketplace because there'll be a new skill and that one will kind of have aged out a little bit. So to me, it's less about skills. It's more about attitudes, really. It's more about fundamental attitudes, about curiosity, about hard work, about resilience, about being a good team member, about those human attributes rather than the skills. I think if you have those human attributes, you can continue to learn, continue to kind of, as I say, be curious and figure out what's around the river bend. If you're less well stocked, if you like, with those human qualities, then you may catch a wave for a while by being hot, having a hot programming skill or a hot tech skill for a few years, but that may age out and you may age out with it. But I think there's absolutely no doubt that, any aspect of technology and beneath that, any aspect of having a math persuasion, a math bent, a competency, a capability of math is going to serve you well. I mean, again, the simple truth is that the world is becoming more technological than it ever has been, and we've had peak opera, we've had peak fiction novel, we've had peak rock and roll, we've had peak movies, but we're nowhere near having peak data science or peak machine learning or peak biotech. Those technology-based industries and the skills within them have got a long way to grow and a long way to develop. So, I mean, orientating yourselves towards that kind of world, I think individuals, corporations are going to do well as a result of that. There's a phrase that we like and we borrowed from a guy called Kevin Kelly. Some of your readers will know, listeners will know, who was the founding editor of Wired magazine. And he said this a few years ago. I think it's a lovely phrase, and it's a nice shorthand phrase, that the future of work is basically X plus AI. X being whatever it is you do. You're a blogger, you're a podcast hoster, you're a writer, you're a thinker, you're a teacher, you're a politician, you're a lawyer, you're a doctor. That's your X. If you can add AI to that, that's how you're going to get to the next threshold the next performance level of whatever it is you do, because the technology is, as I said, becoming more and more central. It's becoming more diffused and infused into everything we do, and adding that technology to your X. That's kind of the route to the next level, and hopefully security.
Interesting. I think so. I was thinking about a conversation that I had with one of the economists and leading economists, and we were talking about you talked about K-shaped recovery. You talked about sort of Brexit, and so his perspective was that K-shaped recoveries happen when you have a fracture, or when you have a empathy issue, or when you have a trust issue, right? So you have sort of, there are two lines, and both, they cannot find a common ground of growth. So one is saying, okay, they are leveraging this platform, the other is probably will see the demise of not getting the favorable outcome from, they don't have a common path to success. So his vantage point was that when you have this trust issue going on with technology, right? So if you see today's pandemic times, you see what's happening with AstraZeneca, right? So few blood clots, they are just because the trust is so high that this vaccine needs. So even just because of correlation, they have to just stop the drug from getting pushed, which could have saved a lot of lives. But because they want to maintain the trust so good, so that everyone end up taking these vaccinations. The same thing is happening with technology, right? So with AI, when we talked about a lot of HR leaders, organizational leaders, about the preparedness of their workforce when it comes to this technology transformation, as you rightly pointed out, it is paramount to not see AI as a threat, but see AI as an asset, as you rightly pointed out. X plus AI is the future. So, and I think your book is pretty interesting in that perspective, right? It brings us into that sort of ethical point of view, empathy point of view of what technology can deliver. But I wonder, what do you think about this idea of our trust with whether technology is a source of good and not really taking away my job, which for most of the ecosystem right now it is.
Yeah, no, again, these are the central issues, I think, of our time, the central issues that we try to address in our book, in Monster, exactly this, that we can see that, if you live in a zip code full of code, you've probably never been richer, happier, more successful in the whole long arc of human history. If you live in a zip code which is kind of more analog, if you live in an analog world, you can see you're getting left behind. You can see through Instagram and through your TV the lives of the rich and famous. And hey, you're not rich and famous. And so that visibility through phones, through technology, to see a world that you're increasingly not part of, I mean, that again is the motivating factor of a lot of the anger that people feel all around the world, in America, in Europe, in Asia as well. People who can, who can feel that the world is slipping away from them. And again, I think if you put this into the context of what we said earlier on about how quickly things have changed, things have changed more quickly in the last 20 years than ever. Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, famously said at Davos a couple of years ago that the world has never changed this quickly, yet will never change this slowly again. And so that notion of the hockey stick, exponential curve of change, again, the human 70,000-year-old operating system of our brain isn't really programmed to change this quickly. And I think a lot of people around the world are struggling with that. So if you buy that logic, and I think we're sort of agreeing here, most people looking independently and objectively and sanely would say, yeah, there is a real issue here. Societies are fracturing. We have winner-take-all economies, platform-based economies where you outsize rewards for the winner and everybody else doesn't get very much at all. So we have a range of issues here, and there are really a range of ways we need to deal with that. There's a sort of political aspect to how we deal with that. And we don't really go into that in our book because we're non-partisan. We're not politically motivated here. So that's a political discussion. People make their voices count at the ballot box. politically, but we can also see that there is a responsibility for corporations, for business, to ensure that opportunity is spread as widely as possible. And Cognizant, many other big companies spend a lot of money trying to help people, get on the tech train, if you like, and go on this journey. One of the models I like, and I've called out, and you may be familiar with this, Michelle, is the way that AT&T talk about this. I mean, again, they recognize all these changes that we're talking about, and they say to their people, we want to take you on the journey with us. We want you to have a successful future, a successful career here at AT&T. So we will pay for training. We'll pay for your upskilling. We'll pay for you to go on a machine learning course, a data science course. We'll pay for that. All we ask is you do that training on your own time. You do that evenings, you do that weekends. And we think that that's a nice balance between the responsibility that the corporation has, not just to kind of get rid of the people who perhaps their skill sets are falling behind that curve a little bit, but it also recognizes that individually everybody has a role themselves. Everybody has agency themselves to look after themselves. Fundamentally, at the end of the day, we're all ultimately responsible for ourselves. And so that balance between corporate responsibility, personal responsibility, we think that's a good model. It's something that we're trying to, mirror, if you like, and do our version of at Cognizant. I think that's a model that all sorts of businesses around the world can apply. Again, recognizing the reality of the change that's going on, recognizing the reality of what happens when it's not managed societally, that things can get very, very difficult. And even in the last few days, you've seen a number of big, powerful CEOs in America talking about these issues and wanting to make sure that corporations are seen as being good actors, if you like, rather than actors of ill will.
I think that's well put, and since we're already talking about the beast in the room, that's technology and its impact on work, so let's bring in the monster. So So I was talking to you about that, and this is a funny story that so I got this book, and then I saw my 4-year-old reading through this, and I was pretty blown away. I said, "Why? Like, wow, that's some curiosity." And I opened the book, and it has fabulous pictures of monsters. So I think it was pretty amazing to see sort of how it is attracting. And so tell us why write this book?
Well, again, it's this notion that technology is becoming so core to everything. And at the same time, we can see that the collision of a lot of technology trends is actually having sort of monstrous outcomes, results. We're not saying in the book that any one individual technology is a monster. We're saying that in combination, the results are proving in many cases monstrous. I mean, think about what's going on in social media, and I hope your young child will keep away from social media as long as they possibly can, because the lots of studies and lots of anecdotes and personal personal experience of kids really suffering from bullying, body dysmorphia, just general addiction to these things, just being on these things the whole time, which isn't good, which is sort of melting a generation's of young people's heads. We can think about the disinformation that's being kind of spread through these phones. We don't really know who's messing with our elections. We don't really know who's attacking us. We don't really know whether to believe this about the vaccines, as you were saying earlier on, or not. Think about how complicated that's becoming. Think about deep fakes. People have seen the Tom Cruise videos, which kind of seem funny. But imagine when that's
scary.
A deep fake of Joe Biden or Boris Johnson saying, "I want you all to go outside of your house and start attacking people with dark-colored skin or something crazy like that. It won't be so funny anymore then. That will be a real problem. And then underlying all of this sort of Cold War, cyber Cold War that's going on between state actors, between hackers. I mean, this is crazy. We're building this digital world, and yet the foundations for that world are very wobbly, very insecure. So when you think about all those things, social media, cybersecurity, deep fakes, disinformation, machine learning, developing at this incredibly rapid rate, we can see, the reality is that we can see in our lives today that there are downsides to all of these trends. And again, that's the reason we wrote the book, is to say, let's not ignore that or pretend that's not happening. Let's acknowledge that these things are happening, particularly this whole kind of social media and children discussion, which is very personally important. Let's acknowledge these things are happening, and let's think about what we could do. So again, we can use these things in a good way and not let them blow things up.
So what are some of your what are the solutions into this, right? So we are facing this, we are seeing this whether we like it or not. Few of us are bad actors, few of us are good actors, and we are exploiting technology to its core to figure out how there's a huge element of capitalism at play as well, right? That's probably helping or hurting the economy, depends on where you're looking at this. So from your vantage point, what's your take? Like, what is the solution? How we as a technology user could navigate through this without getting hurt?
Well, the way we've organized our thoughts is really into two sort of sections of the book. One is in a way a manifesto that we have sort of written for individuals to think about how they use technology, how they interact with technology. And we have some very simple thoughts there, very, in a way, obvious thoughts, but things that we seem to have sort of forgotten in cyberspace. I mean, we call back to the famous golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. We seem to have forgotten that in cyberspace. People just write the most awful, terrible things on Twitter, on TikTok or whatever, and just forget that how painful would that be for us if somebody wrote that to us. We're living behind screens, we're behind glass, and we're screaming at people in the way that we sort of scream at them when we're behind the glass of our car. Get out the way, you idiot. We're sort of talking like that the whole time on social media, and we've got to remember that golden rule of doing to others as you would have done to you. I mean, that's just one simple idea. So we talk about this manifesto, but we also talk in more detail and more kind of black and white about 10 different specific recommendations that we've got. And these apply both to individuals, because there's a political aspect to some of these that people have to vote for and support politicians who put some of these ideas into place, but also legislation that will then be enacted, we believe. So there are things, I mean, I'll just mention a couple of them. One, we call for the establishment of a federal technology administration, which would sit above the FTC and the FCC in America. And for people who know those organizations and their charters, the Federal Communications Agency and the Federal Trade Commission, they don't really, either of those organizations don't really have a charter to address the sort of issues that we're talking about here. We believe it's time to have a branch of government that really is tool to deal with these modern issues. Harking back to that comment earlier on about the senator not really understanding how the game is being played. So we call for the establishment of that, and then within that, we call for the establishment of what we call the U.S. Data Agency, USDA, which really has the authority to regulate how we use technology. And that idea is a an updating of the way that when nuclear power was being developed and commercialized and becoming a part of powering the grid. In the UK, as an example, where I come from, there was what's called the UK Atomic Energy Authority was established as a body to manage this incredibly powerful technology, which we knew could be used for ill and for good. So there's a very sort of strong linkage between the way we've managed other dual purpose technologies, as they're called, in history, and how we should be thinking about dual purpose technologies now. And then one other final thing I'll mention, Vishal, and then I'll sort of pause, is that we're calling for the introduction of an age limit to use social media. We think it should be 18, that kids under the age of 18 should be kept away from social media. Because if you think about it, we don't let kids drive, we don't let kids drink, we don't let them smoke, we don't let them get married, we don't let them join the army, we don't let them vote. But yet we put into the hands of a 13-year-old or a 14-year-old, or even younger sometimes, this incredibly powerful technology without any real supervision. And then we're surprised that bullying and trolling and body dysmorphia that I talked about earlier on happens. It's absolutely crazy. And it's time that we had an age limit. And then we had, in the same way that we introduced kids to driving, through driving lessons, through a test, and then through a revocable license, that's the model we should apply to technology. Not to keep technology, this social media technology away from people, but just to introduce young people to it in a way that they can begin to understand it, and they can begin to tame the monster.
That's interesting. And so what is the role of a leader through this? Like, so if I am leading an organization that is either a technology provider or one of the largest consumer technology, how I should see the technology or transformation or this era as? What's your take on that?
Well, we think that leaders who understand the power of technology should completely be aligning themselves with #TechForGood. They should be using this to produce services and goods and experiences that their customers, their employees, their prospects, everybody in the market at large wants. We can see at the moment that's not the case. There are lots of businesses who are using data, using the power of these technologies in a pretty nefarious, pretty dark, creepy way. And so I think if you want to be a leader individually, collectively, corporately, it's up to you to step forward and say, look, we're not going to do this kind of surveillance model. We're not going to be buying data from all sorts of data brokers and using that in a way that any of our customers would feel uncomfortable with. I think that whole notion of the early stages of the surveillance capitalism economy that I touched on earlier on, I think leaders, the real leaders who emerge from this period of time, are going to be the leaders who take that high path, the high road, that ethically correct high road, who do remember that golden rule personally and corporately and act on that, rather than the people who kind of slink around in the shadows, in the dark side, and perhaps get some short-term advantage from that. But I think ultimately, over the longer term, they're going to be exposed and found out.
That's interesting. And regarding the book Monster, so from through your vantage point, who is the ideal reader of the book? Like, who do you wrote it for?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we wrote it for anybody who really understands and is interested in technology and the role that technology is playing in the modern world. And that is people in business, but it's people of, civilians, if you like, just ordinary folks. Particularly folks with kids who kind of seen, older kids, what's gone on, how addicted kids have become to social media and technology. Anybody who's ever sat at a table in a restaurant back in the days when you could do that, or a dinner party, and seen everybody at the same table kind of looking at their phones and ignoring each other, and thought to themselves, wow, that's crazy. That's just weird and mad. And what the hell is going on in the world? It's for anybody who really has had that sensation that technology is sort of taking us off the beaten path. It's taking us off the high road and taking us into, neighborhoods, particularly perhaps that we don't want to go into.
And what do you want readers to take away from this book besides getting scared of the cover?
Well, we don't really want to scare anyone. The cover is just to draw attention, if you like. We want to offer people thoughts and recommendations of a path forward. I mean, again, we believe that we're sort of at a crossroads at the moment in technology and in the world. And one path is a good path. One path is a path where we harness, we tame this technology, we use it for good. Another path is basically, without being melodramatic about it, is basically a path that takes us into the world that George Orwell wrote about. A very scary world of surveillance and centralized control, which I don't think, again, people of goodwill, people like us, people who love technology, who love the future, who love science fiction, that we really want to live in that dystopia. There's a famous quote, again, people will be familiar with: all it takes for evil to flourish is for good people to do nothing. And we can see a kind of dystopian, Orwellian world emerging around us at the moment. I think it's up to people of goodwill, good people like us, like everybody listening to this now. It's up to us to step forward and to stop that world happening. And if we don't, and if people don't think about these issues, if we sort of blindly sleepwalk into that Orwellian world, well, we won't have anyone to blame other than ourselves. So I think in terms of what we want people to do, we're offering simply within the book some points of view, some perspectives, some framing of these issues, some ways to think about them, and then some recommendations on what we should do about it, which could act as conversation starters for people in a business thinking about how they use technology for personalization, but let's keep away from the kind of surveillance, creepy side of it. It's for policy people thinking about those rules of the road, and it's for individuals. Everybody thinking about how they interact with technology. I mean, one of the ideas in the book, again, people know the phrase "the digital sabbath." There's a lot of good sense to that, good logic to that, to put these things down every now and then, maybe for a day, maybe for a weekend, rather than just be constantly glued to these things and not able to look up at the world and kind of enjoy the world all around us.
I think it's so that, by the way, digital sabbath. So on that note, so we tried doing it, and I think we went maybe half a day, and we were just we had never used to seeing each other that much and not interacting with a phone. And then to get to a weekend, it took us like 4-5 months. So it's definitely, but after the fact, it's beautiful. I think I one of the fans of that.
Again,
so
it speaks to the fact that we are addicted. Most people are addicted to these things, and we all know that addiction is a kind of built into the human DNA. The propensity for addiction is as genetic as having red hair or being left-handed. So it's in the human genome. It's in our operating system. We know how easy it is to get addicted to things, and we know how bad any addiction is to anything. And so the fact that our kids are so addicted, it is going to be hard to break that addiction. It's not going to be easy. We're not imagining for a moment this is going to be an easy fight. But again, I think if you think about these things coldly, objectively, rationally, logically, I think a lot of people probably have these innate feelings that something is not quite right here. Right. Again, our book is simply an offering to help those kind of people.
So interesting. So if I'm on board with this idea of helping out, what do you expect me to do? as an individual. So I've read this book. I love this book. I love what it stands for. Now, what should I do? What's next for me? What do you think?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Michelle. I really appreciate those comments. I mean, spread the word, spread the good word. The longest journey starts with a single step. Spread the word. Tell your friends, tell your colleagues, tell your neighbors, tell your kids, tell the people you work with. Let's get as many people as we can talking about these issues. I mean, that's really simply the role of thought leaders, is to try and share ideas, perspectives, thoughts, and hope we get some people to come along on the journey.
I think that's fascinating. So, by the way, thank you so much for walking us through Monster and putting that much effort into it. It's definitely pretty cool to have such a document, such a book right now available for us to chew on. So now let's I want so let's get to our section which is like a rapid fire. So the idea is that I will throw out a word, or what I expect from you is a one word answer. Or if you want to elaborate, just a quick, snappy elaboration of what comes to your mind, right? Yeah. So let's play that. So let's start with future of work.
I think I said it earlier on. The future of work is always in the future. Another phrase I like when I hear the future of work is I always say that the future of work is not work. And that's a call back to the famous phrase from antiquity: if you do something you love, you never work a day in your life. So I think everybody's future of work should be not work. You should be trying to do something you love. And if you can manage that, then you're not really going to work.
Beautiful. So let's put it one word. So technology. What comes to your mind?
The future.
Leadership.
Never been more important.
Monster.
The great story of our time.
Equity.
Whew. Crucial.
Diversity.
Even more crucial.
Legislature.
Out of fashion, but even more crucial.
Jobs of future, without the word crucial in it.
Bountiful.
Future of learning.
Important.
Things that keep you up at night.
West Ham slipping out of the Champions League place in the English Premier League.
That's a reasonable reason. So so thank you for playing upon that. So now we're at the tail end of the conversation. We ask all of our guests to talk about let's talk about your personal stuff a bit. So we ask all of our guests to talk about something that has helped them be successful or find the success that they have achieved. Some qualities that you attribute to success to. What are those qualities? If you can walk us through that.
Gosh, that's a great question. Well, there's a few things, and I've written quite a bit about this, Vishal, just to sort of delve into my memory to think about some sort of highlights of that. There's a phrase that I've always liked from Pablo Picasso, the painter, who in 1967 said, "Computers are useless. They can only give us answers." And if you think about that, what he means is that humans ask the questions. And I think that was almost pre the computer age. But I think in 2021, that's still true. That even with the most powerful computers we've got today and the most powerful AI-based programs, it's still up to humans to have an underlying curiosity to ask the next best question. I think that's what, if I try and reverse engineer my own journey, my own story, I think that's what I've always done. It's come, to a degree naturally to me, and I suppose I've had some facility at it. But I've always asked good questions. I've always been curious. I've always wanted to know what's next and what's new and what's cool and what's around the river bend and what are you thinking and what are you doing. And I think if you have that underlying curiosity, then the future isn't scary. The future's cool. The future's just the next interesting thing that you're going to figure out. And I think that human curiosity has a long way to go before it's outrun by even the smartest software.
Makes sense. And we ask all of our guests to share some of their favorite reads that has helped shape their perspective, or some of the books that you're currently reading. So besides Monster, so give us few names.
Well, I mentioned Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff from Harvard Business School. I think you can see it behind me on the shelf there. I think that's a very, very important book. One of the most important books I've read in recent times. I think people should read Edward Snowden's book. Again, a very, very important book, very powerful book, very well-written book. People should read, people who are interested in what I've talked about, and particularly the references to Orwell, people should read, if they haven't read already, Dave Eggers' book, The Circle. I call this was about 7 years ago it came out. I call this the prequel to 1984. It explains how 1984 happened. That's a very important book. And then a couple of things I'm reading at the moment, Ishiguro's new book, Clara and the Sun, all about AI. Ishiguro is the Nobel Literature Prize winner from a couple of years ago. His new book is all about AI. It's very interesting. And then the new Walter Isaacson book about Doudna, a woman who created CRISPR. I forget the name of the book, but people will see it, all about the invention of the CRISPR tool and what that's going to mean in terms of editing human DNA, which again is another fascinating story, another fascinating dual-purpose technology, can be used for good or for bad. That's a very interesting book as well.
Thank you. Last but not the least, if you want our listeners and viewers to take away something from this conversation, what would that be? What would be your parting thought?
I think my parting thought would be that the future isn't something necessarily that happens to us. It's something we make, and all of us are involved in making that future. And I think all of us have a responsibility to try and make a future we want. And my feeling, and again, I think part of the animus, part of the motivating thoughts that we had wanting to write this book, was there is a feeling that technology has sort of become so powerful that it is beyond any of our abilities to build the future, that the future is happening to us. I think that's a worrying stance to be in. And I think it starts with people really understanding in detail what's going on, asking those good questions, and recognizing that people like us who love technology, we've got to step forward to tame the monster, because if we don't, as I said earlier on, there won't be any excuses. We'll have no one to blame other than ourselves.
I think that's well put. And with that, thank you so much, Ben, for spending your time with us and helping us understand Monster. And thank you for playing your part in warning us about this increasing or upcoming perils with technology, then how we should navigate our way through it. And to our listeners and viewers, we'll put the link of the book on the description that they can check out. And if they want to get in touch with you, how they can get in touch with you.
Yeah, people will find Monster very easily, or people can find futurework.com pretty easily. And I'm pretty visible on LinkedIn as well, so I'm sure people will track me down. But thanks for the session, for sure. It was great talking to you. I really appreciate being on the podcast, and thanks for everyone listening in.
Thank you.
I was homesick, never really knew that I would have to grow up so quick.